Shalom, my name is Barry Segal, and I'd like to share with you about my own journey in life. I was born, like many Jewish children, in the suburbs of Detroit, actually just next door to the Detroit Zoo by the Lion's Den. So I suppose that may have begun my relationship with the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But in growing up in a very typical conservative Jewish home, my parents would divorce when I was about 6 years old, somewhere in around that time. And of course, it was hard for me to understand what that meant and how my future would continue. But life goes on and you take the punches as they come, and I did as well. Our family attended a Jewish conservative synagogue in Detroit. In fact, my grandfather was once the president of that synagogue, and of course, like most Jewish families, we always attended the high holidays and the services there, and I always enjoyed just listening to the choir and watching the shofar blow during the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, and at the end of Yom Kippur. At the age of 7 years old, my father, who loved music, was not a musician, but he loved jazz music, he loved the classical music, greats, and so I was introduced to music that way, and at that age, my father took me and my older brother, who was also interested in music and was beginning to learn to play drums. We went to a place called Baker's Lounge in Detroit, a very famous music lounge where a lot of jazz artists came, and I'm sure that I was the youngest attendee that night. And during the break, my father invited over the trumpet player, and my father knew that I was really loving music and I wanted to play trumpet, so he invited a famous musician named Dizzy Gillespie over to the table. And Dizzy was this big, tall man, and he had a protruding stomach every time he blew that flugelhorn. And he looked down at me and he said, "Son, I understand that you want to play trumpet," because I had thought every time I saw the shofar blowing at the synagogue, that's what I want to do. I want to play trumpet. And when I looked and saw how big his cheeks would blow out and how big his stomach became, I looked at him and I said, No, I don't want to play, because I thought that I would look like him when I grew older. But at the age of 10, I began to play the guitar. And I loved playing the guitar. In fact, it wasn't something I was forced to do, it was something I had a passion to do. And growing up in Detroit, which was also known as Motown, in the height of its years for soul music, I was influenced heavily by the music that was around me, Diana Ross and the Supremes, Aretha Franklin, of course, the Temptations, and many other African-American groups that just inspired my own rhythm and blues music background. Well, at the age of 10, we finally, my mother and my brothers and I moved to Cleveland, Ohio. So I went from the home of soul music to the home of rock and roll. And it was there that I began to take music on seriously. I began also studying clarinet and other things. But at the age of 13, like most Jewish boys, I was bar mitzvahed. And so I would go back from Cleveland to Detroit, and I would be trained by the worship leader, or the chazan, as he's known, the cantor, who was training me for the entire summer of 1967, leading up to my bar mitzvah. Now, 1967 was a very important historical year, because that's also the very time in June 1967 that Israel took back Jerusalem to unite it for the first time in its history in about 19 centuries. And that was the summer that, of course, I was being bar mitzvahed. And so, you know, bar mitzvahs are a very exciting time, because that's when a Jewish boy becomes a man by tradition under the law of Moses. And I took it very seriously, and of course, the day, that great day when I stood in front of about 1,000 people at the synagogue, singing my Torah portion from the 5 books of Moses, and then the Haftorah portion from the prophets, was an exciting time, and I could tell with my boy's soprano voice, I think I was performing and winning over the family and winning over the congregants of the synagogue, and they all applauded, and so much so it was even recorded on a record album. That was my first actual recording as a recording artist. But from that time on, things changed because I decided I would take the geld, as we say in Yiddish, or the money, and I made a concerted decision that from that time on, I was going to prove to the world my manhood, and I was going to go out and become a Jewish rock and roll musician. Well, that's exactly what I did. With my bar mitzvah money, I went and bought my first Fender Telecaster guitar and my amplifier, and I joined a rock band by the age of 14. Now, at that time, I was also playing the part in school and a city production of Oliver Twist. You know, it's Where is Love, and I'll do anything for you, dear anything. And so I was already into the music scene, the drama scene. But by the age of 14, of course, my voice began to change, and I auditioned for my first rock band that I entered into, and my hair grew down to my shoulders, and lifestyle changed, and I became officially, in the late 1960s, a full-fledged hippie. But along with the music scene came my political leanings, and I started to proclaim that I was an atheist. I didn't believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I became a hippie, yippie, anarchist, revolutionary, pot-smoking, Jewish rock and roll guitar-playing Jew. And so I thought that the best government was no government at all. And so mixed together with music, that was the message that emanated from my life and my lifestyle. And you know, as I was searching and on this incredible journey of life at the late 1960s, early 1970s, I just gave all I could into the music scene, even though I was still attending school occasionally to get through. And so it was everything between demonstrations to also just getting on stage and just, you know, breaking the walls down, the barriers of culture, and overturning the norms that were pretty much set into society in those days when they didn't even allow blue jeans to be worn at school. So we were determined as a band to change the course of not only our school, which was a very highly regarded school in the nation in Shaker Heights, Ohio, but also to change the way people believe and think and all that. And so I pretty much had lost any connection with my Jewish roots. But all that would change because one night I went with the band I was playing with. I was about 15 years of age, and we went to kind of an underground rhythm and blues nightclub called Le Cave in East Cleveland. And we went to hear this band, an amazing rhythm and blues band from California called Pacific Gas and Electric. And I went up to the guitar player. I was sitting right in front of him. And at the end, I approached this guitar player. He had long, dark hair, a long, dark beard, and a beautiful electric guitar over his shoulders. And he looked the way Jesus would look like playing the electric guitar, really. And I walked up to him, and I said, "Thank you so much for inspiring with your guitar and the leads that you played on. And I just want to give you this bag of marijuana joints to say thank you to all of you." And he turned around and he looked me straight in the eyes with a conviction like flames in his eyes. And he said, "No, man, Jesus is the only answer." Well, I stood there frozen on my feet because, first of all, I knew that all rock musicians and blues guitarists, all of them either were drinking or they were smoking, and you know, it was truly the wine, women, and song kind of backroom situation. But here this guy is telling me about Jesus, who I never even heard of, hardly growing up, other than, you know, relating to Christianity as the very religious, persecuting religion against Jews and the Nazis and all that, and anti-Semitism. So I didn't really filter through exactly where he was getting at. But when he said those words, it's as if God planted a seed into my heart in that very moment. And so he gave me a little booklet of Bible verses, and I walked away. I thanked him anyhow, and I gave the marijuana joints to the drummer anyways, who was glad to take them. But believe it or not, 1 year later, as I was totally immersed into the music scene and jamming in Cleveland and on stages here and there, and we were playing pretty much every venue from Pittsburgh to Detroit in those days. 1 year later, though, just unbelievable, this guitar player would leave the band he was playing with, and of all the cities he would settle into the United States, he came to live in Cleveland, Ohio. And he was auditioning for students who wanted to kind of be discipled by him, who wanted to hire him as a guitar teacher. And I knew he was a great teacher. I didn't care what he believed. But from the very first lesson on that he began to teach me, he was teaching me gospel songs, old hymns to souped up rock and roll music. And who was I to question the master, the teacher? Because as long as he was playing great, I didn't care what he sang. He would sing about his testimony. He sang about Jesus, this, that, and the other. And something began to just water the seed that had been planted in my heart. Well, a few months later, he departed. He joined a gospel band, and that was it. And I became more and more committed to the band I was playing with. But the more I played, the more I got high, the more I was seeking in this journey for something that I didn't even know I was looking for, the more I realized the emptiness that was in me. For on May 1st in 1971, I flew down with a bunch of my friends, political activists, revolutionaries like I was at the time. In fact, I used to wear a green leather fringe vest, blue jean bell-bottoms, Levi's, of course, because I am a Levite. Literally, I am of the bloodline of the Levites. And a red headband from my Marxist ideology. And I flew down to Washington, D.C. to shut down the government of the United States of America. Well, it didn't take long that morning. I was arrested shortly thereafterwards. It was a big demonstration on Washington called May Day in 1971. And as I was sitting in this detention arena where thousands or hundreds were arrested, young and old alike, waiting for legal aid to release me and all that, I was sitting there looking at this picture of humanity and others like me that were, for the overthrow of the system, much like we see happening in many countries of the world today. And all of a sudden, this thought process came into me and said, well, if Marxism isn't the answer, and anarchy isn't the answer, and capitalism isn't the answer, and socialism isn't the answer, what is the answer? And a still small voice within inside my mind, like a whisper, said, Jesus has made everything perfect. And I had tears begin to come to my eyes, and I was saying, well, is that me talking, or is somebody speaking to my mind, to my heart? And so these tears began to well up in my eyes that I knew whatever I was seeking was not leading me to any answers. And yet, genuinely in my life, I really care about poor and oppressed people. I really cared for their lives and their welfare. Well, I went back to Cleveland, Ohio from Washington, D.C. that day, and for the next 2 months in school, I just couldn't stop thinking about this Jew named Jesus in English, who we call in Hebrew Yeshua, which means salvation. That's his real name, his real Hebraic name. And so I would think day and night, who is this man from Galilee? Why can I not get rid of these thought processes in my mind? So I went out late June 1971 to pick up my favorite, which was a corned beef sandwich with Swiss cheese and Russian dressing at the local deli. And there's nothing like it. It's not kosher, but it sure is tasty. Here we go. I just wanted to go home to play the guitar. Of course, there's nothing like it with the kosher dill as well. And this was how I would go home and go practice the guitar. And of course, put it all away with the cream soda. And I was walking home from the deli, and I got to the backside of the deli, and I started to sense at 11 o'clock at night this shadow hovering over me. There was no cars any longer in the street. Nobody was walking their dogs. And as I was walking with this bag of food, it's as if somebody was walking from the opposite side. Nobody's seen, but almost like bumping into me, and the food fell out onto the ground. and I fell to my knees by this big oak tree, and I just saw my life going to waste, and tears began to gush from my eyes, and I thought if I didn't live another day, I wouldn't know where I would spend all of eternity and what my purpose in life was. And as I was weeping and crying, I called out I just didn't know what to do. And in the midst of those tears, an audible voice spoke to me and said these exact words 3 times audibly from outside my body: "Barry, you should have more faith than this." 3 times I heard those actual words, and I instantly knew that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Jewish Messiah. I wasn't taken aback, and I knew that I had just connected with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet I was this professing atheist. I didn't believe in God. But in a split second of time, I understood that the Messiah of the Jewish people, and that who was speaking to my heart and my life in that moment, and through those tears, was none other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I just knew it without a doubt. And so I cried out to God. Like from Oliver Twist, I said, "I'll do anything for you." And like the angels of heaven looking over the balcony of heaven saying, "Anything?" And I said, "God, yes, I'll quit doing drugs. I'll drop my relationship with my girlfriend that I was dating. I'll do anything that you want me to do. I'll even quit school for the rest of my life if I have to." Well, that was easy because I hardly showed up at that time. But the one thing God was after was the thing I idolized the most: music and playing blues guitar. And finally, after about 20 minutes, in that near midnight air, that one summer night, I said to God, "If I have to stop playing music for the rest of my life, I give you my life tonight 100%, because I want to know what you have for my life and where I will spend eternity." Well, I got up after about 20 minutes. I knew that the tears of sorrow turned into tears of joy. And I got to the front of my apartment building that night. I was in my right mind, and I was just going home to practice guitar and have that good old corned beef sandwich. And as I got closer to my house, I saw these 2 bushes on the front lawn in front. And they weren't bushes, they were my dogs. They were waiting for me outside. And they began to do flips in the air, and they looked like they had been zapped that night as well, because all of creation was rejoicing over the salvation of this one Jewish soul that came in a supernatural way, not through the New Testament. I had never gone to a church. I never read the New Testament. But in that moment of time, I understood the God of Israel had come and challenged me for the rest of my life to make a decision, which that decision all of you can make at this time. I've never been the same since. My life has had its challenges. It's had its up and downs, like all people walking through the journey of life. But I can tell you this, that He's the rock of our salvation. Best friend that we could ever have, walking hand in hand. And you know, for a few months I didn't know where to go, what to do. But one day I got a call from another Jewish friend of mine, a bass player with another band out in California, who had come back to Cleveland, and he said, "You know, you need to visit this assembly of Christians who love the Lord, love Israel." And that night I showed up at what used to be the Orthodox Jewish synagogue in my community, and I saw this big Star of David on the outside. And it was there that night, later on in 1971, that I would find myself at the altar, and I would be zapped by the power of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. And I got up and I was never the same since. And, you know, I just felt like it was the most Jewish thing to do. And I was zapped by Jehovah Zappa, not Frank Zappa in music. So after my newfound journey in life, walking hand in hand with Yeshua the Messiah, I had moved to Miami Beach, Florida. And while I was down there, I was reading through, for the first time in my life, the scriptures from Genesis all the way through to Revelation. And as I was kneeling in a sand dunes one night, I was reading from the prophet Zechariah chapter 8, under the moonlight sky. And I came to verses 7 and 8, and it talks about how the Lord will bring back and save his people from the east and the west, and they will come back to live in Jerusalem, and he would be their God, and of course, we would be his people. And when I read that, I knew, flashing lights all around me, that God this time didn't speak to me from an audible voice, but through his written word. And I knew that I would one day return to the city of Jerusalem, my hometown now, and that would be my calling in life and the place that I was called to live. And that became a reality, where I would move finally to Israel in 1981, where I've been ever since that time, dedicated as an Israeli citizen to the welfare of the nation, serving in the Israeli military, and having also become a businessman and learning the language of Hebrew. That became my new home. And I've just dedicated my life to him, and I give my life to others to do what was always in my heart, to help the poor and the oppressed, to feed the needy, to do what I can as my part in life, in humanity. So today in Israel, along with my wife, we are co-founders, and we seek to do all we can to aid and help people for not only the physical restoration of Israel, but the spiritual restoration of Israel as well, to help people on the physical plane, the emotional plane, the spiritual plane, to do what we can, our part, our little part in the segment of Israel where we live, to help and share our love and God's love with humanity around us, whether Jewish, Arab, or to all minority groups. We are committed to being a positive answer and providing a positive solution for the people of Israel and the people of this world. So I just want to once again thank the God of Israel that I'm alive today and didn't suffer the consequences like so many musicians back in the 60s and 70s who lost their lives because they didn't find the answer. And each and every one of you can also seek your answer in life, the journey that you're taking through Yeshua the Messiah. Once again, as a Jew, I was a Jew, I'm still a Jew, I'll always be a Jew until the day I die. And when I go on into eternity, may my life's example be one that sheds his love with each and every one of you. God bless you, and shalom from the nation of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, the city of our great God.